The stage came into Bitter Creek on a flat afternoon in late September of 1885, and the boards of the mercantile porch were already lined with men who had nothing better to do than watch a woman climb down. Martha Whitmore set her boot on the step the driver kicked into the dust, took the rail in her gloved hand, and lowered her weight off the coach with the slow, deliberate care of someone who had been doing this her whole life. The springs of the stage sighed up an inch when she was clear of them. A laugh ran along the porch. A young hand in a flat-brim hat pushed his thumb back into his belt and said loud enough to carry to the team and the driver and the woman herself, "$5 says she breaks a chair before sundown." Martha did not flinch. She did not look at him. She did not pull her shoulders smaller or her chin lower or her step softer. She turned her face calmly toward the open mercantile door, set her single trunk on its end beside her, and asked the boy unloading flour sacks where she might find the Calder ranch. The boy gaped at her. The man on the porch laughed harder. Martha waited, hands folded one over the other at her waist, and asked again, in the same even voice, as though the first time had only been a courtesy. The boy pointed north and west toward a road that ran out between two low hills. She thanked him. She lifted the trunk by its rope handle without setting it down again for breath. And something inside her, which had been folded very small for the duration of the stagecoach ride, cracked open. "If this story already has your chest tight, I want you to do something for me before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button and follow Martha Whitmore's story all the way to the end of this ranch yard and through every door it opens. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight, what porch or kitchen or living room you've settled into, because I want to see how far Martha's story travels before the lanterns come down. Stay with me to the very last word." The road north and west out of Bitter Creek climbed slow through grass already gone yellow at the tips, and the wind off the rim smelled of cold coming. Martha walked because there was no one to drive her, and she would not stand on the mercantile porch begging a ride from men who had laid money on a chair. The trunk she set down twice and lifted again twice. The first mile she breathed through her nose, the second she breathed through her mouth, the third she let herself feel the heat in her face and did not slow her stride. A red-tailed hawk worked the air above her in long, lazy spirals. She watched it for the company. She had been 41 years old that May. She had buried her mother in March, the boarding house in St. Joseph the month after that, and the last of what her stepbrother thought he was owed in June. The notice, in the back of the Kansas City paper, had said only this: "Cook wanted ranch. Kitchen, Bitter Creek, 12 men. References on arrival." She had written the man a single page in her own clean hand. He had written back 4 lines. 30 days at low wages. A cot in the pantry. No promises beyond that. Come if you mean it. She had meant it. She always meant it. The Calder Ranch was set down in a fold of land where Bitter Creek made its slowest bend, and even from the road she could see what the place had been and what it was becoming. The barn roof had a slump on the south side that wanted shingles a year ago. A pole corral leaned where 2 posts had rotted at the ground. The big house itself was sound enough, square-built of squared logs and milled siding, with a porch that ran the front and a second porch off the kitchen side that was furred with last year's leaves. A line of cottonwood marked where the creek ran, and the stock she could see down in the bottoms was thin in the flank for the time of year. She knew thin stock when she saw it. She knew, too, the smell of a place that was being run by a man who had stopped looking. A dog came around the side of the house before any human did. It was a yellow mongrel with one ear chewed flat, and it did not bark. It set itself between her and the porch and waited. She set the trunk down, dropped slowly to her heels in a way that was not graceful, but was not awkward either, and held the back of her hand out flat. The dog sniffed. The dog licked. The dog sat, good girl, Martha said quietly. "Is your man home?" The kitchen door opened then, and a woman in a plain gray dress stepped out with a basket of mending under her arm and stopped at the sight of her. The woman was perhaps 50, narrow-faced, with iron in her hair, and good clear eyes. She looked Martha over once, without cruelty and without softness, and said, "You'll be the boarding-house woman." "I'll be Martha Whitmore," Martha said. "Oh." "Eleanor Hollis," the woman said. "I'm the nearest neighbor. I've been keeping an eye on the house since, well, I've been keeping an eye on the house." She did not finish the sentence, and Martha did not ask her to. "He's at the lower pens. He'll be up at dark. I told him I'd open the kitchen for whoever he hired." "I didn't open it. You didn't open it," Martha repeated carefully, hearing the meaning under the words. "It's been closed 4 years," Eleanor said. Mary's kitchen. She died. In the spring of '81. Her mouth tightened and untightened. He hasn't been in it since the morning we carried her out. He eats standing up in the front room. The men eat in the bunkhouse off whatever's hauled out to them. She looked at Martha a long beat. "I won't pretend it'll be easy. The men aren't kind. He isn't unkind, but he isn't anything. You'll do what you can, or you won't, and either way it isn't on me." "It isn't on you," Martha agreed. Eleanor's face did something then. It was not a smile. It was the small private movement of a woman recognizing another woman. "There's a key on a nail above the back door," she said. "I'll send my boy over in the morning with eggs." Mary'd want eggs in that kitchen on a first morning. She lifted the basket of mending higher on her hip and stepped down off the porch. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mrs. Hollis, he's a good man under it," Eleanor said, not turning around. "Under it," and she walked off across the yard toward a buckboard Martha had not noticed standing in the shade of the barn, and she drove away without looking back. Martha picked up the trunk and climbed the kitchen steps. The dog followed her up and lay down against the doorsill like the doorsill had always been hers. The key was on the nail, the lock was stiff, so Martha worked it with the patience of a woman who had opened 100 stuck doors in her time. And when the bolt gave, she pushed the door inward and stood in the doorway and let the smell come out at her before she stepped in. It smelled of cold ash and old flour, and a fainter thing under that, lavender perhaps, or the memory of lavender. Something a woman had once put in a small cloth bag and laid in a drawer. The shutters were closed. The light through the gaps in the shutters laid bright pale bars across a long pine table, scrubbed white by use, and then darkened again by 4 years of nothing. A cast-iron range stood against the far wall, cold, swept clean once and never touched after. Copper pots hung above it on iron hooks, each in its place. A row of crockery on the shelf above the dry sink. A blue and white pitcher with a chip on the lip. A flour bin under the window with a tin scoop set neatly on top. Everything was as it had been left by a woman who knew her kitchen, and meant to come back to it the next morning, and had not. Martha set the trunk inside the door, and closed the door behind her, and stood a moment with her back to it. Then she crossed to the south window and opened the shutter. Then the east window. Then the small high window over the dry sink. The bars of light became a room. Dust rose in the bars, and turned. She went out the back door and across to the woodpile and brought in an armload of split oak, and laid it in the box beside the stove. She brought in a second armload. She opened the firebox, scraped the old ash into the bucket, found kindling in a basket where any sensible woman would have left kindling, and laid a fire the way she had been laying fires since she was 9 years old, with a small tent of shavings under crossed sticks under a single split of oak. She struck a match from the tin on the warming shelf. The fire took at once. The chimney drew. The stove began to tick as the iron warmed. she did not cry. She had not cried on the stage, and she had not cried on the road, and she would not cry in another woman's kitchen on her first afternoon in it. She wiped down the table with a rag from her trunk. She set the kettle on. She found, in the pantry off the kitchen, what she had been afraid she would find: a quarter sack of flour gone weevily at the bottom, a side of bacon black at the rind, a tin of coffee that smelled of nothing, 3 onions soft in the eye, and a row of tacked-up bills above the work counter where someone had been pinning every grocery and feed invoice for who knew how long without ever totaling them. She read the bills standing where she was. Flour at a price she had not paid in St. Joseph in 1879. Bacon at a price she had not paid anywhere. Coffee at a price that would have made her laugh out loud if she had been the laughing kind on a Tuesday afternoon in a stranger's pantry. The supplier's name was the same on every one of them. Pickens & Co., Bitter Creek. She memorized the name without meaning to. That was the thing about Martha. She memorized numbers the way other women memorized hymns, without effort, without intention, and they stayed. Out the kitchen window, she could see down across the yard to the bunkhouse. A long, low building with a stovepipe and a row of pegs along the porch for hats, and from the bunkhouse, smoke was already rising. A thin, mean little smoke. Someone was trying to fry something on a stove that had not been cleaned in a season. She turned away from the window. There was work, and there was light enough left in the day to begin it. By the time the first rider came up the lane, the sun was sitting low on the rim, and the kitchen smelled like a kitchen. Again Martha had soaked the bacon rind in cold salted water and trimmed back to good red meat. She had picked through the flour and saved enough good off the top for biscuits and set the weevily remainder aside for the chickens she had not yet met. She had a pot of beans she had found in a crockery jar going on the back of the stove, with a piece of the saved bacon and one of the soft onions chopped fine, and a spoon of molasses out of a jug she had found in the cold pantry behind a sack she had had to move. The biscuits were on a sheet, ready to slide in when the men's boots hit the porch. The kettle was hot. The table was set with 12 tin plates she had carried in from the bunkhouse herself, while the bunkhouse stove sulked, and no one was inside to stop her. The rider on the lane was Wyatt Calder. She knew him before he was off the horse. He was tall and gaunt in the shoulders, and rode a bay gelding the way a man rides who has not noticed his horse in a long time. His coat was good wool and 4 years out of repair. His hat was pulled low. He swung down at the rail without sound, looped the reins, and stood a moment with one hand on the saddle, as though he were not sure whether to come up to the house or go around to the bunkhouse and avoid it. Then he came up. The boards of the porch took his weight. He paused at the kitchen door. He had not come in through that door in 4 years, and Martha understood that, without being told. She heard him breathe in. She heard him breathe out. He pushed the door open. His eyes went first to the open shutters, then to the lit stove, then to the table, then, last, to her. He was a man perhaps 45 years old, weathered along the jaw, gray at the temples, with eyes the color of creek water under cloud. He looked at her for the length of one breath. He did not flinch. She had watched a great many men look at her over the years, and she had learned to read in the first half-second how the look was going to go. This one did not flinch. He did not slide his eyes down her body and up again. He did not tighten his mouth. He simply looked at her, took her in as a fact, and said, in a voice as flat and unornamented as the table between them, "You're early." "The stage was on time," Martha said. "I walked the rest from town." Yes, his eyes moved once down to her boots and once back up. He was not measuring her, he was reading the road dust. "I'd have sent a wagon, you hadn't agreed to hire me yet." "No," he said. Then, after a beat, "I should have sent a wagon." She did not answer that. She lifted the sheet of biscuits and slid it into the oven, and closed the oven door, and brushed flour off her hands onto her apron. "Your men will be up shortly, at dark?" "There'll be supper at dark." He looked at the beans on the stove. He looked at the bacon. He looked at the open pantry. His face did not change. 30 days, he said. Low wages. A cot in the pantry. That's what I wrote. "I came," Martha said. He nodded once slowly, as if a small private thing had been settled in him that he had expected to go the other way. "I'll have one of the boys bring up your trunk. It's in already." "Then I won't keep you from your stove, Mrs. Whitmore, miss," she said evenly. "I never married." He took that in without expression. "Miss Whitmore." "Mr. Calder." He turned to go, paused at the door, and said over his shoulder, in the same flat voice, "There's a yellow dog comes around. Don't feed her if you don't want her staying." "She's staying," Martha said. He almost smiled. He did not. He went out and across the yard, toward the bunkhouse, with his long, careful, tired stride, and Martha watched him go through the south window, and thought, "He looked at me. He looked at me, and his face did not change." And then she turned back to the stove because the biscuits would catch if she did not, and she did not have time for the inside of her chest just now. The men came up at dark, in a clatter of boots, and low talk. There were 12 of them, ranging from a boy of perhaps 17 to a long-shanked old hand, with a white mustache, who walked with a hitch in his right knee. They came up onto the porch and stopped at the kitchen door, because the kitchen door had not been a place they came to in 4 years, and the light coming out of it was strange to them. Wyatt was already on the porch. He held the door open. He said evenly, "Inside wash. At the basin. Hats off." They filed in. They looked at the table. They looked at the stove. They looked at Martha. One whistled low and was silenced by an elbow from the old hand. The young one in the flat-brim hat from the mercantile porch was among them, and Martha saw him take her in and remember her, and color a little high in the cheek, and then square his shoulders as if to dare her to say anything. She did not say anything. She lifted the lid off the beanpot. She slid the biscuits out of the oven. She set a crock of butter on the table that she had churned with a paddle she had found in a drawer. From cream she had skimmed off 2 pans of milk she had found in the cold cellar in flat dishes, still sitting on the slate, as if a woman would be back for them in the morning. She poured coffee into 12 tin cups. She set a small bowl of stewed apples at the head of the table, because there had been a half bushel of apples in the cellar going soft at the tops, and she would not waste them. The men sat. They sat slowly the way men sit who are unsure whether they are about to be charged for something. Wyatt did not sit. He stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the front room with his shoulder against the jamb and his hat in his hand. The old hand with the white mustache bent his head over his plate without being told. After a beat, the others followed. The old hand said a grace so short it was less a prayer than the clearing of a throat. Then they began to eat. They did not speak for a long time. The boy ate 4 biscuits, one after another, without looking up. The flat-brim hand. Cal, she had heard one of the others call him on the porch, ate 2 helpings of beans and held his cup out a 3rd time for coffee, without quite looking at her face. The old hand chewed slow and watched her across the table with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Halfway through the 2nd round of biscuits, he set his fork down and said, to no one in particular, "Boys, that is a biscuit." A laugh went around the table. It was not a cruel laugh. It was a laugh of men who had been eating salt pork fried to leather and cornmeal mush, gone gray for longer than they wanted to admit. Martha refilled the bean pot from the kettle on the back of the stove. Where she had a second batch holding, she refilled the coffee pot. She did not sit. She did not eat. She moved between the stove and the table, the way she had moved in the boarding-house dining room in Saint-Anne. Joseph for 16 years, with no wasted step, lifting plates before they were quite empty, setting down full ones, listening without seeming to. Wyatt ate standing in the doorway. He held a plate she had pressed into his hand without asking him whether he wanted one, and he ate beans and bacon and a biscuit she had split and buttered for him, and he did not speak. Once she looked up from the stove and caught him watching her. He did not look away. He did not lower his eyes. He held her gaze the length of a long breath and then went back to his plate. That was the second time he had looked at her. She did not count that. She did not allow herself to count that. But her hands knew, and her hands shook a quarter-inch on the handle of the coffee pot, and she set the pot down on the warming shelf and breathed in once through her nose and went on. When the men were done, they did not get up at once. They sat in the warm kitchen, with their hats on the bench beside them and their coffee cups in their hands, and they did not want to leave. The boy fell asleep with his chin on his chest. The old hand finished his coffee in 3 slow sips, and stood at last and said, "Ma'am, I don't know your name, Whitmore," Martha said. "Tend." "Tate," he said, and touched 2 fingers to his temple where the brim of his hat would be if he had been wearing it. "I'm pleased to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Whitmore." Miss Whitmore?" He turned to the others boys. "You'll thank the lady." They thanked her, one after another, in the shuffling, embarrassed way of men who have not thanked a woman for a meal in a long time. Cal mumbled his, without quite raising his eyes. Martha nodded to each of them. "Ha!" She did not smile a wide smile. She gave them the small, steady nod a woman gives when she means a thing and does not need to dress it up. They filed out into the dark spa. Wyatt held the door for them and closed it behind the last, and stood a moment with his hand on the latch. "You'll want hot water in the morning," she said to his back. 5 o'clock? 5, he said. He did not turn around. "Miss Whitmore?" "Mr. Calder." He went out the front way through the house. She heard his boots cross the front room. She heard a door close somewhere, deep in the house that had been closed for a long time. She stood at her stove and let her hand rest on the warm iron of the lid, and looked at the 12 tin plates with their smears of bean and biscuit, and the bowl of stewed apples gone down to a single brown sliver in the bottom, and she thought very clearly, and without any decoration, "I can save this place." And immediately under that thought, like a stone under water, she thought, "He looked at me." She slept on the cot in the pantry that night, with the yellow dog curled against the door, and she dreamed of ledgers. By the 3rd night, the bunkhouse hands were eating better than they had eaten in 4 years, and Martha had ordered nothing new. She had used what was in the cellar and what was in the cold pantry and what was in the smokehouse, which she had opened with a key she had found in a tin in the dry sink. There were 2 hams hanging in the smokehouse that had been hung in February and forgotten, and they were perfect, and she had carved one down for the table, and would carve the second over the course of the next 2 weeks. There were 3 crocks of pickled cucumbers under the cellar steps, put up by a woman who had known what she was doing. There was a sack of dried beans, a sack of cornmeal, still sweet, because the sack had been tied tight. A row of jars of preserves laid down in a careful order, with the dates inked on the lids in a hand. Martha was already coming to recognize Mary Calder's hand, small, neat. She fed them ham and beans and biscuits on the 2nd night. She fed them ham and cornbread and pickled cucumbers and a custard, out of eggs the Hollis boy had brought over in a basket on the 3rd. The custard caused the boy with the 4 biscuits to set his spoon down and stare into the bowl and say, "Ma'am, what is this?" Tate laughed, for the first time Martha had heard him laugh, and said, "Son, that is what the rest of the country has been eating while you've been eating mush." The custard was gone in under 3 minutes. Martha had made a second pan and set it on the warming shelf, and that one went too. Wyatt ate, standing at the doorway each night. He did not sit at the table. He did not speak much. On the 3rd night he set his empty plate down on the dry sink and stood a beat longer than necessary, and said low, only for her, "How are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Feeding 12 men on what you haven't ordered." "You had a great deal in your cellar, Mr. Calder." "I didn't know what was in my cellar." "No," she said. "You didn't." He took that in. He did not bristle. He did not apologize, he simply absorbed it. "When the cellar runs out," he said. "What then?" "When the cellar runs out," she said, "I'll have your supply ledger and I'll have a long letter to your supplier." His eyes moved up to the bills tacked above the work counter. He had not looked at them in some time. She watched him look at them now. He read the top bill. He read the second. He did not read the third. He set his jaw. "Pickens," he said. "Pickens," she agreed. "Mary used to order through him." "Yes." "He's been here since before her." "Yes." He was silent. He looked at the bills the way a man looks at something he has been avoiding the look of. Then he said, "I'm not a fool, Miss Whitmore. I know that, Mr. Calder. I have been," he said. "But I'm not. There's a difference." He looked at her then, full on, the 3rd time. His eyes were tired and clear. "There's a difference," he repeated. "All right." He took his hat off the peg and put it on his head, and went out the kitchen door into the dark, and she heard him cross the yard to the porch where he sat sometimes in the evening alone, and she did not follow. She turned back to the dry sink and washed the plates one by one, and dried them with a flour sack towel and stacked them on the shelf, and she thought about the bank notice she had pulled half-burned from the ash bucket that morning while laying the fire. A stiff cream-colored corner of paper with a printed letterhead reading "Far St. Bitter Creek," and a fragment of typed text she had been able to read before she had set it carefully aside in a tin on the top shelf. The unpaid balance of $1 remain at per annum, accelerated demand. Maybe. She had not shown it to him. She would not yet. She would have her numbers first. The hands began, in the small ways men show such things, to belong to her kitchen. They knocked snow. There had been no snow yet, but there would be. And they were already adjusting their habits. They knocked the dust off their boots on the porch board before coming in. They took their hats off at the threshold. They washed at the basin. She set out with hot water and a cake of soap she made herself out of cracklings and lye and rendered fat from the smokehouse. They did not curse at her table. The boy with the 4 biscuits, whose name was Davy, began to bring her small things. A handful of late blackberries from a thicket down the creek, a string of trout he had caught off shift, a folded square of brown paper with a pressed yellow leaf inside it that he set on the windowsill without explanation. She thanked him for each one, and did not tease him. Cal did not bring her anything. Cal sat at the foot of the table and ate his fill, and did not meet her eye. And on the 4th night, in front of all of them, with 2 helpings of stew already in him, and a biscuit in his hand, he leaned back against the bench and said, loud, "Boys, reckon this chair'll hold, or do we need to send to town for a new one?" The table went still. The boy, Davy, froze, with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Tate, at the head of the table, set his fork down very carefully, and looked at Cal with the slow look of a man who has been about to say a thing for some time, and has just been handed the moment to say it. "Cal," Tate said. "What?" "Shut your mouth." Just, shut your mouth, Tate said again, in a voice that did not rise, and Cal's mouth shut. The silence that followed sat on the table for the length of 3 breaths. Martha did not look up. She was at the stove, with her back half turned, ladling stew into a fresh bowl that she had been about to bring to Tate. She did not flinch, she did not speak, she did not slow the ladle. She finished what she was doing, lifted the bowl, turned, and crossed to the table and set the bowl down at Tate's plate and said, "Lo. Eat it while it's hot, Mr. Tate, ma'am," Tate said. She straightened. She turned to go back to the stove. And as she turned, she lifted her eyes once across the table to where Wyatt was standing in the doorway, with his plate in his hand and his hat on his head and his eyes already on her. And Wyatt did not look away. He held her gaze across the bowed heads of his men, across the lamplight and the steam off the stew, across the 4 years between him and the kitchen he had not come into, and he held it a beat too long. A beat that anyone at that table looking up at the wrong second would have seen. A beat that Tate, who saw everything, saw. A beat that Cal, with his eyes on his plate now, did not see. A beat in which the kitchen tilted very slightly under Martha's feet and then righted itself. She broke the look, first because she was a working woman in another man's kitchen, and she had stew on the stove. She went back to the range. She lifted the lid. She stirred. Her hand was steady. That was the thing about Martha. Her hand was always steady. After supper, Wyatt did not go out the front way through the house. He went out the kitchen door, the same way the men went. "Well, and—" He paused on the porch, in the dark, and Martha, drying her hands on her apron at the dry sink, heard him stop. He said low, into the dark, not turning back to her, "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Calder? Folks in town talk. They do. They've talked at you. Yes. They'll talk at me for hiring you. Yes. I'm not most men," he said evenly, into the dark. "In that regard." She did not answer at once. She let the words land. She dried her hands a long second, longer than they needed. Drying then, she said, equally even, "All right, Mr. Calder." His boots went down the porch step. The yellow dog, who had taken up residence on the kitchen sill, lifted her head and lowered it again. Martha set the towel down. She did not let her hand go to her face. She did not let her shoulders drop. She picked up the broom and swept the kitchen floor with long, firm strokes from the stove to the door, and when she was done, she opened the door and swept the dust out into the dark, and the dust went out of her kitchen and into the wider world where it belonged. Cal did not come in to breakfast the next morning. The hands ate biscuits and gravy and fried ham, and Davy ate 5 biscuits and apologized for the 5th, and Tate drank his coffee black, and watched the door and did not comment on the empty place at the foot of the table. After breakfast, as the hands filed out, Tate hung back a moment by the dry sink and said quietly, "He'll come around, ma'am. He's not bad. He's young, and he's stupid, and his daddy was the worst kind of mean. He'll come around, or I'll come around him. Thank you, Mr. Tate." Just Tate. Tate. He touched his temple where the brim would be, and went out. Martha stood at the dry sink a moment with her hands in the warm water and looked out the window down across the yard. 2 riders were coming up the lane from the south road. She did not know the road. She had walked in from the north, from Bitter Creek. The southern road went, she had heard one of the hands say, to the bank and to the Pickens place beyond. The 2 riders were not Wyatt and not Tate. One was a man on a tall sorrel horse, dressed in a black coat too clean for ranch work, with a flat black hat and a pale, smooth face. She could see even at the distance, because he rode with his head up like a man who wanted to be seen. The other was a smaller man on a mule, with a leather satchel across his lap. They rode up to the porch of the main house. They did not come to the kitchen, they knocked at the front door. Martha dried her hands and stepped quietly through the kitchen into the back hall, and stood just inside the dining room door, where she could hear without being seen. Wyatt's voice she heard first, low, terse. The visitor's voice she heard second, smooth, light, almost cheerful. The voice said, "Wyatt, Wyatt, you'll let me in or won't you? It's cold on a porch. Say what you came to say, Silas. Wyatt, say it. I came to look in on you. I came to ask after your stock. I came because we have a quarterly that wants signing, and you know quarterlies want signing. And I have ridden out twice in 2 weeks on your behalf, and I do not relish a third ride." Then leave the paper. A pause, a laugh, light. "Wyatt, you know I can't leave the paper. The bank wants a witnessed signature. Mr. Tate, perhaps. Tate's at the lower pens. Then perhaps the new. I hear you have a new cook." A longer pause. "My new cook," Wyatt said evenly, "is not your business." "Of course not. Of course not. Only as a witness. Leave the paper, Silas." "I'll bring it to town signed, Wyatt, my friend." The voice dropped a half-tone, gentled. "You are behind? You know you are behind. The bank is patient, because I am patient. I am patient, because Mary was a friend to my mother. But there is a limit. There is a limit to what I can hold." A silence. Then Wyatt, "I'll come to town Friday." "Friday?" "Friday, Wyatt," the voice was almost sad. "I hope you mean it, boots on the porch." The front door closed. The 2 horses turned in the yard and trotted back down the lane south, and Martha stood in the back hall with her hands folded over each other at her waist, and listened to the hooves until they were gone, and then she stepped back into the kitchen and crossed to the window and watched the 2 riders go small and smaller against the yellow grass. "Silas Vane?" she thought. "So that's his face." That was a Tuesday. The next morning Cal came in to breakfast. He came in with his hat in his hand and his eyes down, and he stopped just inside the kitchen door and set something down on the dry sink, without looking at Martha, and said, quickly, like a boy who has been made to do a thing, "Out of my pay from Pickens." And he turned and went and took his place at the foot of the table, without waiting to see whether she had heard him. It was a small burlap sack. There were 6 onions in it, hard and good, with their papery skins on. Martha looked at the sack for a long moment. Then she picked it up by the throat and carried it to the pantry shelf and set it down beside the row of jars. And she came back out and ladled gravy onto Cal's plate at the foot of the table, and set the plate in front of him and said evenly, "Thank you, Mr. Gay." Cal. Just Cal. He did not look up. The back of his neck was red. Tate, at the head of the table, took a sip of his coffee and met Martha's eye over the rim of his cup, and did not smile, but his eyes were quiet. The boy Davy looked up at all of them in turn and then back at his biscuit, and decided to mind his own business in a way that meant he had understood every part of what had just happened. After breakfast, when the hands were gone and the kitchen was quiet, Martha began the work she had been waiting to begin. She did not begin it lightly. She had asked Tate, the second night, where Mary Calder had kept her household papers. Tate had said he did not know. Eleanor Hollis, when she had ridden over on Sunday with a fresh loaf of brown bread and stayed for coffee at the kitchen table, had said only, "Mary kept a tin. She kept it where she kept her flour." The flour bin was a wooden box, on legs, under the south window. Martha had been in and out of it twice a day since Tuesday. She had not looked behind it. She set her shoulder to one end of it now, and slid it forward 6 inches, and there, set against the wall, was a tin box, of the kind that holds tea, with a hinged lid and a small clasp. It was painted dark green, and the paint was chipped. Martha lifted it down, and set it on the table, and opened it. There were 3 ledgers in the tin. They were each the size of a man's hand, bound in oilcloth, with ruled paper inside. The earliest was dated, in the same careful slanted hand Martha had seen on the preserve jars, January 1877. The latest left off midline in March of 1881. There was also a smaller book, untitled, in which Mary Calder had kept what looked like recipes and household notes, and a folded paper at the bottom of the tin that Martha did not unfold yet. She sat down at the table. She moved the lamp closer. She opened the first ledger. It was exactly what she had hoped it would be. It was a working woman's household book, kept the way Martha herself kept books, in columns. Date. Item. Source. Quantity. Total. Notes. The hand was small and even and unhurried. The columns ran straight. The arithmetic was perfect. Martha checked 3 totals at random in the first month, and they were perfect. Mary Calder had ordered her flour by the hundredweight from Pickens and Company Me. Bitter Creek, at a price per hundred that Martha read twice to be sure she had read it correctly. She had ordered bacon by the side, at a price per pound. That was 1/3 of what was tacked above the stove. Now, she had ordered coffee, salt, sugar, molasses, lard, cornmeal, dried beans, dried apples, soda. All of it through Pickens. All of it, at prices that were honest, 1877 prices, that were not even cheap, that were only what such things had cost. Through 1878, the prices crept up the way prices crept up. Through 1879, they crept up again. Through 1880, they held. Through the winter of 1880, into the spring of 1881 they held. Then the ledger stopped, midline, on the 14th of March, 1881. The last entry was 3 pounds beef tea, 1 ounce camphor, 1 box mustard plaster, Pickens, $1.4. Notes, 4 W's cough. Martha sat with her hand flat on the page a long minute. Then she unfolded the paper at the bottom of the tin. It was not what she had thought it might be. She had thought it might be a letter. It was not a letter. It was a copy, in the same small, careful hand, of a loan paper. At the top, First Territorial Bank of Bitter Creek, drawn in Mary Calder's pen as she had copied it. Below, the names Wyatt Calder, borrower, and Silas Vane, agent and witness. Below that, an original principal of $4,200, drawn against the creek bottom acreage and fee. Below that, neatly underlined, interest at the rate of 9% per annum. Term, 10 years. 9%, Mary had underlined 9%. Martha sat back in her chair. She read the figure again, 9% per annum, on $4,200, drawn against the creek land. In 1880 she turned the page. There was a second sheet in Mary's hand, a note, no salutation, no signature, only the words E holds the original. MWC, June 1880. E. Eleanor. Martha folded the paper carefully, and laid it back in the tin, and closed the tin. She did not put the tin back behind the flour bin. She carried it across the kitchen, and set it on the high shelf, above the dry sink, behind the row of crockery, where it could not be seen from the door. Then she sat back down at the table, and lifted the topmost grocery bill off its nail, above the stove, and laid it beside the open ledger and began, in pencil, in a fresh page she had torn from the back of the last ledger, to copy the figures into a column of her own. By noon she had not eaten. By 2 she had a column 3 pages long. By 3 she had set the pencil down, and was sitting with her hands folded over the column, and looking out the window, without seeing the yard. The flour Pickens had been charging Wyatt Calder for the last 4 years was, by the pound, between 2 and 3 times what Pickens had charged Mary Calder for the same flour in 1881. The bacon was between 3 and 4 times. The coffee was 4 times. The molasses was twice. The lard was twice. The cornmeal was twice. The dried beans Pickens was charging Wyatt at a price Martha had never seen in any market she had ever stood in. There was no way at all, that the underlying wholesale price of any of these goods had risen at those rates between 1881 and 1885. Some of them had fallen. She knew this. Joseph in 1884. That was the first thing. The second was the loan, 9% per annum on $4,200, drawn in 1880. 5 years compounded honestly came to a number Martha could do in her head, and the number she got, even allowing for a year or two of missed payments, was nowhere near what would justify the kind of half-burned acceleration language she had pulled out of the ash bucket on her second morning. Unless the rate Pickens Vane the bank was actually collecting was not 9%, unless it was something higher. Unless it was something high enough to violate territorial statute, which capped, Martha was nearly certain, at 10%, though she would want to put her hand on the statute book to be sure. She would want to put her hand on a great many things. She would want, first, to see the original loan paper Eleanor was keeping. She would want, second, to see the actual current bank notice Wyatt had crumpled into the ash bucket, and she would want it whole and not half-burned. She would want, third, to know precisely what Silas Vane had been carrying in that satchel on the mule Tuesday morning, and what the witness' signature was meant to do, and why Wyatt had stalled him until Friday. It was Thursday afternoon. She rose from the table. She put the ledgers away in the tin, and the tin back on its high shelf. She set a kettle on for the men's coffee, and began the evening's biscuits, and considered how to say to Wyatt, that night, in the kitchen, the things she had to say. She did not get to say them. The men came in at dark and ate and went out, and Wyatt ate standing in the doorway, and went out with them, and he did not come back through the kitchen, and he did not stop on the porch to speak into the dark. He was up before her in the morning, and gone before she had her stove lit, and Tate told her over breakfast that Wyatt had ridden out at 4 to bring in 2 strays from the upper pasture, and would be gone past noon. Friday, Martha thought. He's avoiding Friday. She finished the breakfast plates. She set bread to rise. She told Tate she was going to walk over to the Hollis place mid-morning if he could spare her an hour, and Tate said he could, and at 10 o'clock Martha put on her shawl and her bonnet and started across the south pasture toward the Hollis ranch, which she had been told was 1.25 miles through a low gap in the hills. She got 200 yards from the house before she heard hooves on the lane behind her. She did not turn around at once. She kept walking. The hooves came up at a smart trot. They slowed beside her. She turned then. It was the man, on the tall sorrel. Silas Vane. He had reined down to her walking pace, and he sat above her, smiling, with his black hat tipped back on his head 1/4 inch, and his pale, smooth face turned down toward her in what she would later identify as an expression he believed to be charming. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. Miss Whitmore, forgive me. I am Silas Vane. I represent the First Territorial Bank of Bitter Creek, and certain other interests. I had hoped to meet you on Tuesday. But Mr. Calder thought better of an introduction at the time. Mr. Vane, you're walking far on a cold morning. I'm walking to a neighbor's. 'Low me to ride you over. I'd rather walk. The smile did not falter. The horse paced beside her. You're new to our valley, Miss Whitmore. I am. I want you to know, he said, in the same light, cheerful voice with which he had spoken on the porch. that there are people in this valley who take an interest in the Calder Ranch. People who have taken an interest for a very long time. People who would be sorry to see. Well, he waved a gloved hand. To see anyone misunderstand the situation. There, I don't misunderstand situations easily, Mr. Vane. No, he said. I don't expect you do. He looked at her then, and the look was not unkind. Exactly, Silas Vane was not crude. Martha understood at once. But it was a measuring look, and it measured her the way a man measures a sack of flour he means to put on a scale he has rigged. Mr. Calder is a grieving man, Miss Whitmore. He has not been well in his mind since Mary died. He makes generous gestures sometimes. Hires people he should not hire. Makes promises he cannot keep. Ty, I would not want you to be hurt when the time comes by promises he cannot keep. I have not been promised anything, Mr. Vane. No? 30 days at low wages and a cot in the pantry. He laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and small. Well, he said, that's honest of you. He touched the brim of his hat. Miss Whitmore? A pleasure. We'll meet again, I expect. I expect we will. He clucked to the sorrel. The sorrel sprang into a trot. He rode off across the south pasture in the direction Wyatt had ridden at 4 that morning. And Martha stood a moment in the cold yellow grass and watched the dust of his going. And thought, you wanted a look at me. You came down this road to get a look at me. You wanted to know what kind of woman I am. Now you know one wrong thing about me. That I will walk a mile in the cold rather than ride beside you. And you do not know that you know it. She walked on. The Hollis place came up over the gap in the hills. A tidy frame house, painted white with a green door. Smoke at the chimney. A buckboard in the yard. Eleanor was in the kitchen garden, bent over a row of late onions. She straightened when Martha came up the path and brushed her hands on her apron and looked at her once, and said, You found the ledgers. You found the ledgers. Come in. They sat in Eleanor's kitchen, which was bright and warm and smelled of yeast and cinnamon. Eleanor poured coffee. She set a plate of buttered bread between them. She did not waste time. You found the copy of the note. Yes. 9%. He's collecting more than that. I think he is. I know he is, Eleanor said, evenly. I've watched it for 2 years. Mary asked me to hold the original. She gave it to me in June of 1880, 6 months before she took ill. She did not trust Silas Vane the first day she met him, and she did not trust him the last day. She told me, if anything ever happens to me, you keep this paper for Wyatt. He'll need it some day, and he won't know. He needs it. I have kept it. I have it in a tin in my dresser drawer under my mother's wedding linen. I will give it to you when you need it. I'll need it soon. How soon? Vane was at the house Tuesday morning with a satchel and a witness. Eleanor's mouth set. He's moving. I think he's moving. Mary saw it coming, Eleanor said. She told me once, sitting where you're sitting, that Silas Vane would take that ranch off Wyatt within 10 years of her dying if she didn't put a stop to him. She didn't know she had 4. She didn't know he had 2. Eleanor set her cup down. Wyatt has been a man asleep on his feet since the morning we carried Mary out. I have watched the place go down. I have watched the bills go up. I have watched Silas Vane ride up that lane twice a month for 4 years, smiling. I have been waiting for someone to come who could see it. She looked at Martha directly. I had begun to think no one would come. Martha did not answer at once. She turned her cup in her hands. She said, finally, I am not most people, Mrs. Hollis. Eleanor's mouth softened. No, she said, you are not. Martha walked back to the ranch, with the coffee still warm in her chest, and the shape of the thing forming itself behind her eyes. the way a quilt forms on a frame. When you have laid out all the squares, and you can finally see what the pattern is going to be. She walked into the kitchen and set her shawl on the peg, and lit the stove, and put the kettle on, and as she did the yellow dog by the door lifted her head and growled low in her throat, and Martha looked up out the south window, and saw, coming up the lane at an easy pace, the tall sorrel and the man on the mule with the satchel. It was not Friday yet. It was Thursday afternoon. He had come a day early. She heard Wyatt's bay come into the yard from the other direction at almost the same moment he had ridden back from the upper pasture. He swung down at the rail, and the two riders pulled up beside him, and Silas Vane lifted his hat with one gloved hand and said, in a voice that carried clearly across the cold yard to the kitchen window where Martha stood with her hands in flour, "Wyatt, forgive me coming a day ahead. The judge sets out of the next county on Monday, and I would not have a paper of this weight delivered by hand without the proper formalities. I have brought the notary." He gestured to the small man on the mule. "I have brought this." He drew from inside his black coat a folded paper. It was thick. It was sealed. He held it out flat across the saddle horn, so that Wyatt would have to come up to him to take it. Wyatt did not come up. He stood at his horse's head, with one hand on the rein. Vane smiled. He swung down. He walked the 4 steps across the yard. He held the paper out at the level of Wyatt's chest. "What is it?" Wyatt said. "It is what you knew it would be. Wyatt, the bank has accelerated the note. The full balance is due. You have 14 days. After 14 days, the creek bottom acreage transfers in fee to satisfy the debt. I am sorry. I have held them off as long as I could." He laid the paper into Wyatt's hand. "There is an invoice attached. The bank wants the accumulated supply advances cleared as part of the settlement. Pickens has been carrying the ranch on credit for some months at my request as a courtesy. The total is on the second page." Wyatt did not look at the paper. He looked at Silas Vane. His face had no expression of any kind. Through the kitchen window Martha could see only the back of his head and the line of his shoulders, and the line of his shoulders had gone very still. 14 days, Wyatt said. 14 days! You came a day early to tell me this? I came a day early to be sure you understood. Wyatt unfolded the paper. Then he read it. He read the second page. He read the third. He did not speak. The notary on the mule shifted his weight in his saddle and looked away across the yard. Martha came out of the kitchen door. She did not mean to. She came out without thinking, with the flour still on her hands and on her apron, and she crossed the porch and stopped at the top of the steps and stood there. Vane saw her. He smiled at her. He raised his hat to her a second time. "Miss Whitmore," she did not answer. She was not looking at Vane. She was looking at the paper in Wyatt's hand, and specifically at the second page, the invoice page, which Wyatt was holding now at an angle that let the afternoon light fall across it, and she could read, even at the distance of 15 feet, and through the cold clear air, the printed letterhead, at the top of it, Pickens and Co. Tar. And below that, in the inked hand of a clerk, an itemization of advances against the Calder account from January through September of 1885. Flour, bacon, coffee, cornmeal. The price per hundredweight was printed in the right column. It was the same price, the very same number, that Martha had seen. An hour earlier, in Mary Calder's careful hand, in the green tin box behind the flour bin, in the ledger dated 1881. Multiplied, exactly, by 2.5. Wyatt was reading the invoice. He had not seen what Martha had seen. He could not see what Martha had seen, because he did not have a 4-year-old ledger in his head. He was reading a piece of paper that was telling him he had 14 days to find a balance. He could not find. He was reading it the way a man reads his own obituary. His shoulders were very still. Silas Vane was watching him read it. Silas Vane was smiling. Martha set her floured hand on the porch rail. She did not flinch. She did not speak. She did not let her face change. She stood at the top of the kitchen step, with flour on her hands, looked at the back of Wyatt Calder's neck, and at the invoice in his hand, and at the smile on Silas Vane's pale, smooth face, and she counted, silently, the days from this Thursday afternoon to the Thursday 2 weeks hence, on which the creek bottom acreage would, by the terms of the paper now in Wyatt's hand, transfer in fee to a man who had been bleeding this ranch for 4 years, and she thought, very clearly. You will not have it. She did not say it aloud. She turned, with the flour still on her hands, and went back through the kitchen door, and she did not close the door behind her. She crossed to the high shelf above the dry sink. She lifted down the green tin box. She set it on the long pine table that had been scrubbed white by use and darkened by 4 years of nothing, and lit again, 3 nights ago, by her own lamp. She opened the lid. She laid the 3 ledgers out in a row. She laid the copied loan paper beside them. She set her hand flat on the topmost ledger. Out in the yard, Silas Vane was saying something about Friday. About the bank in town. About the courtesy he had shown. Wyatt was not answering. 14 days, Martha thought. All right. She heard the sound of Vane's horse turning in the yard and the slow grit of hooves walking back down the rutted track toward the road, and she did not look up from the table. She heard Wyatt's boots on the porch boards. The small pause at the threshold he had been pausing at for 4 years, and then, after a breath, the boards taking his weight as he came through the kitchen door and stopped. He stood with the paper in his hand. He did not sit. He looked at the table where she had laid the ledgers out, 3 of them in a row. The leather of the oldest one cracked at the spine where his wife's thumb had ridden it open 1,000 times, and then he looked at her hands, still white at the knuckles with flour, and then at her face. Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Mr. Calder. What is this on my table? This is your wife's hand, Martha said. These 3 are her household books, from the year you married until the spring she took sick. I found them behind the flour bin the first night. He did not move. And this, she said, laying her finger on the loose sheet she had copied out by lamplight the evening before, is the rate Mr. Vane is collecting on your note. I copied it off the paper you keep in the desk drawer. I should not have gone into the drawer without asking. I went in anyway. She waited. He set the acceleration notice down at the corner of the table, well away from the ledgers, as though he did not want the one paper to touch the others. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. He did not take off his hat. He put his forearms on the wood, and looked at the books the way a man looks at a horse. He is not sure he can still ride. Show me, he said. She turned the topmost ledger so it faced him. She did not push it across. She turned it carefully, with both hands flat on the cover, the way a woman turns a child to face the light. This is May of the year she died, Martha said. She bought from a man named Tully, out of the Bitter Creek Mercantile. Flour at $2.40 the hundredweight. Beans at 4 cents the pound. Bacon side at 11 cents. Coffee at 22. Sugar at 8. She fed 12 hands and the 2 of you, and she ran the kitchen on $41.60 that month. Wyatt looked at the column. He did not speak. This, Martha said, and slid the loose tacked-up bill from her apron pocket, the bill she had taken off the nail above the stove that morning. Is your April 11. Days ago, the same Tully, the same mercantile. Flour at $5.10 the hundredweight. Beans at 9. Bacon at 24. Coffee at 48. Sugar at 17. Same goods, Mr. Calder, same store. Twice the price, and a little more than twice, on the things a working man eats most of. He read the bill. He read the column. He read the bill again. That's not the market, he said. No, sir. The market hasn't moved like that. No, sir, it has not. I asked Cal yesterday what flour was costing his sister in Laramie. He didn't know I was asking why. He said 2.80, maybe 3. He said his sister complains. Wyatt set the bill down beside the ledger, so the two columns lay together. He put his thumb at the top of one and his forefinger at the top of the other, and read them down side by side. His mouth did not move. After a long while he said, "How long?" "I can only show you what I have," she said. "Your wife's books stop in May of '81. The tacked bills above the stove go back to last September. Between her last entry and your first bill on the nail, there are about 3 years and 4 months I cannot account for at this table. But the 4 months I can read tell me the same story every week. He is billing you between twice and 2.5 times what your wife was paying for the same goods at the same counter, and he has been doing it long enough that you stop looking at the bills. I stopped looking at most things." "I know that, Mr. Calder." He let that sit. Then he said, "And the note is a separate matter, and it is the worse one." She drew the copied sheet toward herself and turned it so he could read along while she spoke. She did not point. She did not put on a teacher's voice. She read the figures the way she had read them at 1 in the morning, plainly, as though she were reading the price of beans. The note was written for $4,800 in the spring of '82. That is what is on the front page of the paper in your desk. The rate written on the face is 10% per annum. Simple. That is a steep rate, Mr. Chirka. Calder, but it is a legal rate. The territory allows up to 12, all right. The acceleration he handed you in the yard a quarter hour ago says the balance due is $11,420. Wyatt's jaw did not move, but something behind his eyes did. At 10% simple, on 4,800 for 3 years and 10 months, the balance, including unpaid interest, ought to be a hair under 6,700. I worked it twice. He is asking nearly $5,000 more than the paper in your drawer entitles him to. He's collecting compound. He is collecting worse than compound. I sat with it last night and ran the rate backward, off the balance he is now demanding. To arrive at 11,400 from 4,800 in 3 years and 10 months, he is charging better than 28%, compounded twice a year. The territory's outside limit is 12. Simple. He is collecting at more than double what the law in this territory will allow him to collect. And he is collecting it on a paper that on its face says 10. How? He has been sending you a statement once a quarter. I found 4 of them in the ash bucket, half burned. I pieced them together this morning. They do not show a rate, they show only a balance. A man who has stopped opening his mail does not query a balance. He pays it down when he can and lets the rest ride. I let the rest ride. Yes, sir, you did. He looked at the green tin box. He looked at the loose sheet. He looked finally at his own hands on the table, broad and weather-cracked and still. And he said very quietly, "She kept all this. She kept it like scripture, Mr. Calder. Every penny, every pound. She wrote down the weather on Tuesdays. She wrote down whether Cal had been into the molasses. She loved this house." He shut his eyes. She did not say anything else. She let him have the moment. She got up from the table and she went to the stove, and she moved the coffee pot a half-inch to the left, where it had always sat at mid-morning when his wife was the one moving it, and she came back and sat down again with her hands folded on the wood. After a while he opened his eyes. I want to see Tully's name, he said. In her hand she turned to May. She turned to April. She turned to March. She turned the pages slowly. And she let him read the name himself, written out in the dead woman's small, careful script. Tully, Bitter Creek, and the figure beside it. And the figure. He has been at that counter the whole time, Wyatt said. Yes, sir. So when she died he waited a year, by the look of it. He waited until you stopped opening the door to the kitchen. Then he raised his prices on you alone. I do not believe he raised them on anyone else in town. I will find out today whether he did. But I do not believe so. Because Vane told him to. I cannot prove that with what is on this table. I can prove the prices, and I can prove the rate. The third leg of it, the kickback to Mr. Vane, out of what you are overpaying Mr. Tully. I will have to put a witness on Tully. Mr. Tully, yes, or his clerk, or his book. And the book is the surest of the three. Wyatt sat looking at his wife's handwriting for a long time. The flour on Martha's knuckles dried and powdered down onto the dark wood, and she did not brush it away. Mrs. Whitmore, he said at last. Yes, you came here to cook. I came here for 30 days at $6 and a cot in the pantry. You have been here 11. 11? Yes. And on the 11th morning, you have laid out for me, on the table my wife scrubbed, a thing that has been killing this ranch since before you knew the name of the creek. I have laid out what was already here, Mr. Calder. You walked past it for 4 years, because looking at it hurt worse than losing the land. I am only the one who opened the tin. He let that pass over him. He did not protest it. What do we do? He said. We do not move at him yet, Martha said. He gave you 14 days. He believes you will spend 12 of them at the bank trying to find money you do not have, and the last 2 of them drunk. If you go to town today and start asking questions, he will know inside an hour, and he will accelerate the acceleration. He will move the deadline up. He will frighten Mr. Tully into burning a book. He will send word ahead of the circuit judge so the judge does not come through. We have one chance, and it is the chance of his believing you are still asleep. I am awake. Then be awake, in this kitchen, Mr. Calder. Not in town, not yet. He nodded. Once? And the second thing, she said, is that I cannot do this from a pantry cot. I do not mean the cot. I mean I cannot stand up in front of a judge in 2 weeks' time and say I am the cook. The cook does not read a note. The cook does not put a man off his land. I will need standing in this house by the time the judge sits down, or Vane will turn me into a joke before I open my mouth. What do you want? I want you to ride to Mrs. Hollis today. Today, before noon. You have not been to her door in 4 years, Mr. Calder, and I know that, and I am asking it anyway. She was your wife's friend. She kept things for your wife. She may have papers I cannot find in this house. And when the time comes, she will sit at my right hand at the supper I am going to set, and the town will believe her. Where they will not believe me, Eleanor? Yes, sir. He drew a breath. He let it out. All right, he said. And one more. Tell me, Cal. He looked up. Cal, sir. The one who bet a chair against me on the porch 11 days ago. I want him sent for the judge. Cal. He has been bringing me onions out of his own pay since the night the old hand told him to shut his mouth. He has been the first one at the table, and the last one off it. He will ride harder for me than any of the older men, because he is trying to undo something. I would like to let him. Wyatt looked at her then in a way he had not looked at her yet, not even across the supper table the night of the chair joke. He looked at her as a man looks at a piece of country he is trying to memorize, because he is afraid of forgetting any of it. All right, he said again, and this time it sat differently in his mouth. He got up. He walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold and put his hand flat against the jamb the way a man does at a doorway he is finally crossing again. And he said, without turning, "Mrs. Whitmore." "Yes." "What was my wife paying for coffee?" 22 cents the pound, in May of '81. "And Tully's last bill?" 48. He stood in the doorway a moment longer. Then he stepped through it and went down the porch steps and across to the corral. And she heard him saddle the bay himself, which he had not done in 4 years. And she heard him ride out. She did not sit down again. She put the ledgers back into the green tin box. She did not put the loose sheet in with them. She folded the loose sheet small and put it inside the bodice of her dress, against her ribs, where it would be warm and where no one would think to look for it. Then she went out to the smokehouse to count what bacon was left, because the men still had to eat at noon, and a cook who suddenly stopped cooking was a cook who told a story she did not want told. He came back from Mrs. Hollis's a little before 3 in the afternoon, and Eleanor Hollis was riding behind him on her own gray mare with a flat oilcloth packet tied to her saddle horn. Martha was at the dooryard with a basin of peeled onions when they came up the track, and she saw Eleanor see her before Eleanor had quite slowed the mare. And she saw Eleanor's face do the small, unguarded thing a woman's face does when she has been told a story and is now matching it against the real article. Eleanor was a tall, lean woman of about 60, in a gray riding habit gone shiny at the elbows, with white hair pulled back so plainly it was almost severe, and a face that had not been pretty since the war and had not needed to be. She swung off the mare without help. She walked straight up to Martha at the basin, and she put out her hand. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Mrs. Hollis. Wyatt has told me what is on your table." "Yes, ma'am, I have what is on mine." Eleanor untied the oilcloth packet from her saddle, and brought it up to the porch and set it on the boards. She did not open it there. She waited until they were in the kitchen, with the door shut and the curtain drawn across the window that looked out on the yard, and then she sat down at the long pine table and unfolded the oilcloth and laid out one at a time 6 sheets of stiff cream paper folded in thirds. "Sarah brought these to me in the winter of '80, Eleanor said, 3 weeks after Wyatt signed the note. She rode over in a sleet storm, and she made me promise I would keep them and never speak of them unless one day someone in this house asked. She said Wyatt would not ask. She said it might be a woman who asked, and if a woman asked I should give them up." Wyatt was standing at the doorway. He had taken off his hat. His mouth was a hard, hurt line. "She knew," he said. "She did not know about Vane. Wyatt. She knew about you. She knew you signed things without reading them when you were tired, and that the spring you signed this note you had been up 4 nights with the cattle. She kept the original because she did not trust the copy in your desk to be the same paper. She unfolded the topmost sheet and turned it so Martha could see it. Martha bent over it. She read the first page. She turned to the second. She turned to the third. She lifted her face. "Mrs. Hollis, yes, the face of this paper says 8%. I know, the paper in his desk drawer says 10. I know that too. I read his this morning over Wyatt's shoulder. They are not the same paper, Mrs. Whitmore. The signature pages are. The figure pages are not." Martha sat down. She put both hands flat on the table on either side of the original. She did not speak for a moment. Wyatt came in from the doorway and sat down at the head of the table, and he was breathing, the way a man breathes who has carried a weight a long way and just understood he was carrying someone else's. "He altered the rate after I signed it," Wyatt said. "He altered the rate after you signed it," Eleanor said. "And then he sat on the altered paper for 3 years and bled you slow on it. And now he is calling the whole balance in on a number he invented, out of a rate that was never on the document you put your name to. 8% simple, Martha said quietly, almost to herself, on 4,800. For 3 years and 10 months, he would be owed about 6,300. Not 11,420. Not even close. And he would be owed even that. Eleanor said, only if the kickbacks out of Tully's till were not, in fact, payments on the note that he has been pocketing. Martha looked up. You have thought about this. I have had 4 years to think about it, Mrs. Whitmore. I could not act on it. Sarah made me promise I would not act on it until somebody asked, and Wyatt would not ask, and I was a widow on 160 acres, with no standing to walk into a bank in Bitter Creek and call a man a thief. I needed somebody at this table. Sarah told me I would know her when I saw her. Eleanor looked at Martha levelly. Hello? Martha did not look away. After a moment she said, Hello, Mrs. Hollis? Eleanor? Martha? That was the whole of it. They did not embrace. They did not weep. Eleanor turned to Wyatt and said, Now the judge. Cal will go, Wyatt said, tonight. At dusk, he'll be quieter, at dusk. Send him with money for fresh horses, and tell him not to drink at the change stations. Tell him Judge Wickham is at Fort Laramie this week on the Powder River claims and will be in Cheyenne by Saturday. He needs to be turned this way before Saturday, or we do not have him. You know where he is. My brother rides circuit clerk for him. I have known where Wickham was every Friday for 9 years. Wyatt, you known. I have been waiting to have a use for it. Wyatt nodded. He rose. He went out to find Cal. Eleanor and Martha sat together at the table with the original loan paper between them, and the green tin box at Martha's elbow, and the afternoon light coming sideways through the kitchen window onto the wood. How heavy is this on you? Eleanor said. It is not on me, Martha said. It is on him. I am the woman who is reading it out. He has not asked you to stay. He has asked me 30 days. He will ask you longer. Are you going to say yes? Martha did not answer at once. She looked at the original loan paper. She looked at her own broad hands on the table. After a while she said, I will set my conditions when the time comes for setting them. I am not setting them today. And... Good, Eleanor said. Don't. Cal rode out an hour before dark with a roll of bread and bacon in his saddlebag and the names of 3 change stations between Bitter Creek and Fort Laramie written on the inside of his hatband in Martha's hand. He did not make a speech about it. He had come into the kitchen earlier in the afternoon, after Wyatt had spoken to him at the corral, and he had stood by the stove with his hat in both hands, and said, Mrs. Whitmore, I called you a name on the porch the day you got off the stage. I remember, Cal. I am riding for you. You are riding for Mr. Calder. No, ma'am. I am riding for you. He knows it. I know it. I would like you to know it too. All right, Cal. He set off west into the long light, and the older hands came up to the porch, one by one, through the evening, to say nothing in particular, and to look at her with the look men give a woman they have decided to stand behind without anybody asking. Hennessy, the oldest hand, the one who had told Cal to shut his mouth the night of the chair joke, came last. He stood on the bottom step and turned his hat in his hands and said, Ma'am, there are 11 of us left here, not counting Cal, and the 11 of us will be at that table on the night you set it. Whatever you tell us to do, we will do. If you tell us to stand at the corral gate with rifles, we will stand at the corral gate with rifles. If you tell us to pour coffee, we will pour coffee. We have eaten at your table 11 nights now, and that is enough for us. Mr. Porce. Hennessy, ma'am. I am not asking for rifles. No, ma'am. I did not expect you would. I wanted you to know they were available. I will need you to pour coffee." "Yes, ma'am." He nodded, set his hat back on his head, and went down to the bunkhouse. Martha stood on the porch a moment after he was gone, with her hand on the post Wyatt had stood at the night of the first supper, and she did not cry, because she did not cry where anyone could see, but she stood there a long time before she went back inside. 2 days later, Silas Vane rode into the yard on a different horse, a tall sorrel with a silver-tooled bridle, and he did not dismount. Hey! He sat in the saddle with the sun behind him, so his face was hard to read, and he called Wyatt out from the barn. "Calder Vane. A small adjustment to our timetable." "What adjustment?" "The bank wants the matter closed before the end of the month. There has been some talk at the counter, and the cashier is uneasy. I am bringing the date in by a week. Friday next, not Friday after. 8 days. Martha was at the kitchen window. She did not move the curtain. She watched Wyatt's shoulders. They did not change. 8 days, Wyatt said. 8 days. I am sorry for the inconvenience. I have, in fact, been more than generous, as I am sure you will agree once you have had time to reflect. All right, and Calder. Yes, this thing you have done in the kitchen, the cook, I have heard about it in town. People are amused by it. I do not begrudge you a hot meal in a hard season. But I would not put too much weight on a fat woman with ideas above her station, if I were you. Some of the men at the bank find it undignified. Wyatt did not answer. Goodbye, Calder. Goodbye, Vane. Vane turned the sorrel and rode out. Wyatt stood in the yard a long time. Then he came up to the kitchen, and Martha was already setting a cup of coffee at his place. 8 days, he said. I heard he has someone at the bank watching him. He has been frightened by something. He has not been frightened by us yet. He cannot have been. Cal has not come back. Eleanor has not been to town. It is something else. Tully, maybe. Tully may have begun to sweat. What do? We do exactly what we were going to do. We do it 8 days sooner. The supper is on Thursday next, the night before he calls the note. Eleanor and I will go to town tomorrow, with a list of who I am inviting. I am inviting every neighbor in the basin, and I am inviting the cashier at the bank, and I am inviting the postmistress, and I am inviting the Reverend, and I am inviting Mr. Tully. Tully, yes. He will not come. He will come. Quarter, because the alternative is that I send Mr. Hennessy to fetch him. Wyatt almost smiled. He did not quite, but the corner of his mouth moved. And the judge, he said, the judge will come because Cal will bring him. And if Cal does not bring him in time, you will go yourself on Wednesday and ride him in over Wednesday night. All right. She turned to the stove. He sat with the coffee in his hands and watched her at the stove, and after a while he said, Mrs. Whitmore. Yes, I have been short with you these 11 days. You have been a man with a great deal on his shoulders, Mr. Calder. I have been short with you. I would like to be less short. She turned. She wiped her hands on the apron. She looked at him across the kitchen. Then be less short, she said. He nodded. He drank his coffee. The next morning she went into town with Eleanor in the gig. She wore her good gray dress and the bonnet she had not unpacked in 11 days. And she carried a small reticule with a folded list inside and nothing else. They went first to the postmistress, who was named Mrs. Beckett, and who had known Eleanor all her life. And Eleanor said, in the plainest possible voice, Maud, I am inviting you to supper on Thursday at the Calder place. I would like you to come, and I would like you to come knowing that the books on Wyatt Calder's loan will be opened on the table that night in front of the circuit judge. And I would like you to be there as a witness. Mrs. Hi. Beckett looked at Eleanor a long moment, and said, I will be there. Eleanor, she did not look at Martha at all. Until Martha had turned to go. And then she said, Mrs. Whitmore, in a voice that was an invitation to be looked at, and Martha turned, and Mrs. Beckett said, Sarah was a friend of mine. You are using her kitchen well, Martha said. Thank you, ma'am, and went out. They went to the cashier at the bank, a thin, nervous man named Pettigrew, and Eleanor did not invite him in the open street. She drew him into the side alley behind the bank and said, Mr. Pettigrew, you have been losing sleep. Come to supper Thursday night at the Calder place, and you may sleep again on Friday. Pettigrew looked at his shoes and said, Mrs. Hollis, I cannot speak about the bank's business. Eleanor said, I am not asking you to speak. I am asking you to come and sit and eat. The speaking will be done by paper. Pettigrew nodded once quickly and went back inside. They went to the Reverend, who said yes immediately and asked no questions. They went to 4 neighboring families along the basin, the Carltons and the Mendels and the old widower Hoyt and the Vasquez brothers, and at every door Eleanor said only, supper at the Calder place Thursday, and bring your hunger, and I will tell you the rest when you are sitting down. None of them refused. 2 of them held Martha's hand at the doorway and asked her in the careful country way whether she had everything she needed and whether she was being treated rightly, and Martha said yes to both, and was surprised both times to find she meant it. They went to Tully last. Tully was a long-faced man of about 50. With the kind of soft hands a counter gives a man over 20 years, and a wedding ring he turned absently while he talked. He saw Eleanor come into the mercantile, and his face went smooth, in the way a face goes smooth when a man is afraid and trying not to show it. Mrs. Hollis, Mr. Tully, and Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it? I have heard a great deal about your kitchen at the Calder place. Mr. Tully, I am inviting you to supper on Thursday. That is very kind. It is not kind. I would like you to be there, Was. I am not certain. My wife and I are free Thursday. Mr. Tully, Martha said, and she did not raise her voice at all. Mrs. Calder's household ledger for May of '81 shows flour at $2.40 the hundredweight, purchased at this counter from a clerk named Mathers. The bill tacked above my stove dated the 2nd of April this year shows flour at $5.10 the hundredweight, purchased at this counter from the same clerk. I would like you to be at supper on Thursday, and I would like you to bring your purchase book for last April. If you do not come, the circuit judge will be at this counter on Friday morning with a writ for the book. I am offering you the supper, Mr. Tully. The supper is the easier road. Tully looked at her. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at his own hands on the counter. He turned the ring once. He said very quietly, I have a wife. Tully. He came to me in '82. Vain, he said. Mr. Calder was unsteady. He said it would be a kindness to keep him supplied even when he could not pay on time, and that for the trouble of carrying the account. I would receive a small consideration on each order. The consideration grew. The prices grew. I, Mrs. Court. Whitmore, I have a wife and 4 children and a mortgage on this store that he holds the paper on. I know that as well, Mr. Tully. What do? You come to supper. You bring the book. You sit down beside Mrs. Hollis and you tell the judge what you have told me. And when the night is over you walk back into this store and your mortgage will be held by the bank and not by Mr. Vane, because by Friday morning Mr. Vane will not be in a position to hold paper on anyone. He closed his eyes. I will come. Thank you, Mr. Tully. They rode out of town in the gig with Eleanor at the reins, and Martha did not speak for almost 2 miles. Then Eleanor said, You have done this before. I have not done this before. You have done some piece of it. I ran a boarding house 12 years, Mrs. Hollis. I ran it after my husband died, and I ran it when the railroad tried to lay track through the kitchen, and I ran it when a sheriff tried to put a tax lien on my back porch. I have stood across a counter from a frightened man before. That is the piece I have done. You are very steady. I am not steady. I am holding very still. Eleanor looked at her then, with a kind of slow recognition. Yes, she said. I see that, I take it back. You are not steady. You are something better than steady. They rode the rest of the way home in companionable quiet. Cal came back on Wednesday at mid-morning with the circuit judge riding behind him on a tired roan, and Wyatt met them at the gate. Judge Wickham was a man of about 60, with a clipped white beard and a black coat dusty to the elbows, and the kind of plain, unimpressed eyes a man develops over 30 years of being lied to professionally. He swung down stiffly, and he shook Wyatt's hand. He looked at the house, he looked at the corral, he looked at the kitchen window where Martha was standing, and he touched the brim of his hat to her through the glass before he had even been introduced. In the kitchen, he sat at the long table, and Martha gave him coffee and a plate of cornbread and bacon and a bowl of beans, cooked down with onion and a little molasses, and he ate it slowly and finished the plate. And then he said, Mrs. Whitmore, I have ridden 91 miles in 3 days on the strength of a young man's word that this was worth my time. Show me what is on this table. She showed him. She walked him through the dead wife's ledger, and through Tully's tacked bills, and through the loan paper from Wyatt's desk, and through the original loan paper Eleanor had carried for 4 years, and she ran the rate for him out loud the way she had run it for Wyatt. And she set Tully's confession in plain words as a thing he would hear from Tully's own mouth the following night. The judge did not interrupt when she was done. He tapped the corner of the original loan paper with one knuckle. Mrs. Whitmore. Yes, sir. Has Mr. Vane been told there is a judge at this ranch? No, sir. Will he be told before tomorrow night? No, sir, he will not. He believes Mr. Calder is at the bank trying to find money. Good. Keep him believing it. I will sit in your pantry tomorrow night, with the door cracked, until the moment Mrs. Hollis stands and names you. And then I will come out and sit at the head of the table, and from that moment until I am done. This is my supper. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Mr. Calder. Sir, you signed an 8% paper. Yes, sir. And you have been paying a man who has been quietly collecting. 28. Yes, sir. That is a thing the territory takes a hard view of, Mr. Calder. The territory takes a particularly hard view of it when the lender has been a member of the territorial bar, which Mr. Frack Vane was admitted to in '79, and which I will tonight write a letter to suspend pending the disposition of tomorrow's matter. Is there anything you want to say to me before I sit in your pantry? Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My wife kept these books. I know she did, Mr. Calder. I knew Sarah a little. She came to a hearing of mine in '78 on a water question, and she sat in the back, and she took notes in a little book, and she sent me a letter afterward, correcting 2 of my figures. She was right on both. Tell Mrs. Whitmore, I am glad somebody else opened the tin. I will. Thursday was clear and cold. The hands began at sunrise, with Hennessy running them like a crew on roundup. They set the long pine table out into the dooryard end to end with 3 sawhorse tables from the bunkhouse, and they laid a clean white sheet over the whole length of it, and at one end Martha set the green tin box and the original loan paper and Tully's purchase book, which Tully had ridden out at dawn to deliver with his own hands and a face like a man going to a funeral. The hands carried benches from the barn. They carried lanterns from every outbuilding, and hung them on twine between the porch posts and the cottonwood, at the corner of the yard. Cal had ridden into town at first light, and come back with 2 crates of glasses borrowed from the Reverend's wife, and a small barrel of cider that Hoyt the widower had sent ahead, because he said no honest supper went dry. Martha cooked from the moment the stove was lit. She cooked beef stew with carrots and onion and a little flour to thicken. She cooked beans, baked down all day in a covered pot with molasses and a ham bone she had saved from Tuesday. She cooked 4 loaves of bread and 6 pans of cornbread, and a great kettle of greens with bacon. She cooked 2 apple pies out of the dried apples in the loft, and a third out of the windfalls Eleanor had brought over in a sack. She cooked enough for 40. She had been told 28 would come. She cooked enough for 40, because she had run a boarding house, and she knew what would happen. 43 came. They began arriving at 4 in the afternoon, in wagons, and on horseback, and on foot, and they brought, without being asked, baskets of cold chicken, and jars of pickled beets, and a great wheel of yellow cheese, and a crock of butter, and they set these things on the table beside hers, and did not crowd her cooking off it. Mrs. Beckett came in a black bonnet with a ribbon at the chin. The Carletons came with their 5 children scrubbed pink. The Vasquez brothers came on the same mule and laughed about it. Hoyt came alone, and brought a fiddle he did not play. Pettigrew the cashier came last, and stood at the edge of the yard like a man at the edge of cold water, and was led to a bench by Eleanor herself. Tully sat at the table in his good coat with his hands flat on either side of his plate, and did not look at anyone for the first hour. Vane was not there. Vane had not been invited. The lanterns were lit at dusk. The Reverend said a short grace. The plates went down the table, hand to hand. The cornbread vanished, and a second batch came out of the kitchen on Cal's tray. There was talk along the table about the cattle and the late frost, and a wagon that had broken an axle at the ford, and the talk was warm because the food was warm, and the food was warm because Martha had spent 11 days teaching the stove what it had forgotten. When most of the plates had been cleared a second time, Eleanor Hollis stood up. She did not knock on her glass. She did not have to. The table quieted around her like wheat going still in a wind that has dropped. "Friends," she said, and her voice carried, because it had been made to carry across 160 acres in the rain. "I want to take a moment before the pie comes out." A small laugh ran along the table. She let it go by. Most of you knew Sarah Calder. Most of you sat at this same table when she was the one cooking. Most of you have not sat at this table in 4 years, and there is a reason for that, and the reason is grief, and grief is no man's fault. But 4 years is a long time, and in 4 years a great deal can happen quietly in the dark, and tonight I want to say a few plain things in the light. Wyatt sat very still at the foot of the table, with his hands around his coffee cup. There is a woman at this supper named Martha Whitmore, who came to this ranch 11 days ago off the stage out of Cheyenne, and who has fed every one of you tonight on the honest pantry of this place for less, I would venture, than what one cousin at this table spent on her own household last week. She has fed 12 hands here for 11 days, on something near a quarter of what Mr. Calder has been billed for the same period. She has done this with the same flour, the same beans, the same bacon, and the same coffee that come off the shelves of Mr. Tully's mercantile in Bitter Creek. The difference is not in her cooking, though her cooking is very fine. The difference is in the price. Tully's hands closed around the edge of the table. I want to say one more thing about Mrs. Tanday Whitmore before I sit down, because I have heard, in town this week, a piece of talk to the effect that she is a fat woman with ideas above her station. I have heard it twice. I will not tell you who said it. I would like to say, in front of every one of my neighbors, and in front of God's own Reverend, that Mrs. Whitmore has read the books in this kitchen, with more care than any banker in this territory, and that she has, in 11 days, found a thing that has been bleeding this ranch for 4 years, and that the only station she occupies above is the one any honest soul occupies above a thief. I would be proud, friends, to have her at my table any night of my life. I am proud to be at hers tonight." She sat down. There was a silence. Then Hennessy at the far end brought his palm down on the table once, hard. And the Vasquez brothers followed. And then the Carletons. And then everyone. And the sound of it ran across the yard and over the corral and out into the dark pasture, and Martha stood at the kitchen door with a dish towel in her hands and did not let her face do anything at all. Because there were 43 people watching, and her face was not for them tonight. Her face was for later. Judge Wickham came out of the pantry. He came out without ceremony, and he walked the length of the table, and he sat down in the chair Wyatt had left empty for him at the head, and he took off his hat and set it on the cloth. And the table went quiet a second time, in a different way. "Good evening," he said. "I am Judge Erasmus Wickham of the Territorial Circuit. Some of you know me. I have been sitting in Mr. Calder's pantry for the last 40 minutes on the invitation of Mrs. Whitmore here and Mrs. Menitz. Hollis there, listening to a supper that is one of the better suppers I have eaten in 9 years on this circuit. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. You are welcome, Your Honor. I am going to do a piece of court business at this table tonight. It is not a formal sitting. Anything I rule tonight will be entered in the docket at Cheyenne on Monday and confirmed, and any party with an objection may file it then. I am doing it here in the open air in front of 40 of his neighbors. Because the matter concerns Mr. Wyatt Calder of this ranch and Mr. Silas Vane of Bitter Creek, and because Mr. Prater Vane is not present, which is a circumstance of his own making, and not the court's. The matter is the validity of a promissory note and the legality of its rate of interest. And the matter is the conduct of a kickback scheme between Mr. Vane and the vendor of this household. Mrs. Whitmore, will you bring me the papers? She brought the papers. She brought the green tin box and she set it at his elbow. She brought the original loan paper, which Eleanor laid in his hand. She brought the loan paper from Wyatt's desk, which Wyatt laid beside it. She brought Tully's purchase book, which Tully himself slid down the table one place at a time until it reached the judge's hand. She brought her own loose sheet from her bodice, warm from her ribs, and she said at last. The judge read. He read for almost 20 minutes by lantern light, and not one of the 43 people at the table spoke. The Carleton children, who had been wriggling, sat as still as small stones. Pettigrew, the cashier, had tears running down his face that he did not bother to wipe. Tully sat with his hands folded as if in prayer. The judge looked up. Mr. Tully, sir, the purchase book you have laid in front of me shows, on its left-hand columns, the wholesale price you paid for flour, beans, bacon, coffee, and sugar in each month of last year, and on its right-hand columns, the price you charged out at counter to the Calder Ranch in each of those same months. The margin you took on the Calder account is, on average, 214%. The margin you took on every other account in this book in the same period is, on average, 19%. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. You were instructed by Mr. Vane to take the higher margin. Yes, sir. And the difference between the 19% and the 214%, where did that money go? To Mr. Vane, sir, in cash. Once a month. I have a separate sheet. Bring me the sheet. Tully went to the saddlebag on his horse, and brought back a single sheet of paper folded in eighths, and he laid it in front of the judge, and the judge read it, and he set it down on top of the rest. Mr. Calder, sir. The note in your desk drawer shows a rate of 10% simple. The note in Mrs. Hollis's keeping, which is the original instrument and which bears your signature on the back of every page, shows a rate of 8% simple. The figures on the face of your copy have been altered. The alteration is not skillful and would not have survived a careful look in good light, but you have not given it a careful look in good light in 3 years. No, sir. The acceleration notice. Mr. Vane handed you 12 days ago. Demands $11,420. Mrs. D. Whitmore has calculated, and I have just confirmed, that at the rate of the original instrument, the balance owed at the date of the notice is $6,341.16, less the kickback payments which I rule constitute, under territorial law, payments on the note as a matter of equity. Tully's separate sheet totals at $4,783 over the period in question. That brings the actual balance owed on the note, as of the date of the acceleration, to $1,558.16. Wyatt closed his eyes. I will rule. The following to be entered. Monday. The promissory note dated April 14, 1882, between Wyatt Calder and Silas Vane, is reformed to its original terms of 8% simple. The acceleration is void. Mr. Core. Vane forfeited the right of acceleration when he tampered with the instrument. The balance owed is $1,558.16, payable on the original schedule, which runs another 4 years. Calder. You may pay it off tomorrow, or you may pay it off in 1889. It is your choice. Yes, sir. As to Mr. Vane, the matter of the altered instrument is a felony under territorial law, and I will refer it to the federal marshal in the morning. The matter of the kickbacks is the territories, and I will write that letter tonight. The matter of Mr. Brock and Vane's bar membership is mine, and I have already written that letter. It goes out with the first rider tomorrow. Mr. Vane will not, by Saturday noon, be in a position to hold paper on any soul in this territory, and any paper he holds at present is subject to immediate review by this court. Mr. Tully, sir, you confessed before I asked. I am putting that in my notes. The court will recommend, when the prosecutor takes up the kickback matter, that the recommendation reflect your cooperation. You will testify when called. You will not adjust your prices on the Calder Ranch or any other ranch in this basin upward, for any reason, for the next 12 months. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Mr. Pettigrew. Sir Pettigrew stood up. He was shaking. You came tonight. Yes, sir, that counts. Sit down. Pettigrew sat down. The judge looked at Wyatt. Mr. Calder, the court is done with you for tonight. Whatever else needs saying at this table is not for the court, Mrs. Whitmore. The supper was very fine. May I have my pie? There was a moment in which the table did not breathe, and then there was a great breaking laugh from Hoyt the widower at the far end. And then everyone was laughing, and the pies came out, and the cider was poured, and Mrs. Prass Beckett the postmistress was crying into her napkin, and the Carleton children were chasing each other around the cottonwood. And Eleanor sat back in her chair and let her shoulders drop for the first time in 4 years. Martha did not sit. She moved up and down the table with the coffee pot. She refilled every cup. She did not flinch when Hennessy caught her wrist as she went past and said, in a voice that was not quite steady, "Ma'am," and let her wrist go again. She did not flinch when Mrs. Carleton stood up and embraced her at the corner of the table and said into her shoulder, "Mrs. Whitmore, I am sorry for what I thought when Eleanor first said your name to me at the door yesterday." "Martha," said Mrs. Carleton, "you do not owe me an apology. You have already paid in advance by coming." Mrs. Carleton sat down and cried a little into her pie, and ate the pie anyway. Pettigrew came up to her by the kitchen door and said very low, "Mrs. Whitmore, I would like you to know I was going to come to you on Monday. I did not have the courage to come earlier. I am ashamed of that." "Mr. Pettigrew?" "Yes." "You came tonight. Judge Wickham said it counts. It counts with me also." He nodded and went back to his bench. The lanterns burned down toward midnight. The neighbors began to leave in 2s and 3s. with their baskets emptied and their plates clean, and a piece of news to carry that they would carry for the rest of their lives. Eleanor was the last to go. She kissed Martha on the cheek at the gate and said, "I will be back Sunday for coffee." And Martha said, "I will have it ready." And Eleanor rode out into the dark on her gray mare. The hands cleared the table without being asked. Hennessy moved them like a quiet army. They folded the cloth. They carried the benches back to the barn. They blew out the lanterns, one by one. When the dooryard was dark and empty and only the small lamp in the kitchen window was lit, Martha was sitting on the kitchen step with her hands in her lap and her hair come a little loose at the temples, and she was looking at nothing in particular, and Wyatt Calder came across the yard from the corral and stopped a yard short of her. He took off his hat. He held it in both hands. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Calder." He sat down on the step beside her. He did not sit close. He left a hand's width of pine between them. He looked out at the dark pasture and the cottonwood, and the post Sarah had hung the rope swing from in '79, and after a while he said, "I would like you to stay. I have 30 days, Mr. Calder. 19 of them are left. I would like you to stay past that as cook." "No, ma'am." "As what, then?" He turned the hat in his hands. "As my wife." She did not look at him at once. She looked at her own hands in her lap, the broad knuckles, the small white scar at the base of the thumb she had got at 14 on a kettle handle in her mother's kitchen. "Mr. Calder?" "Yes. I am going to set conditions all right. The first is that my name goes on the deed to this ranch beside yours. Not after yours, not in your stead, beside. If I am to marry you, I am to own with you. I have been a wife once before, and I have buried a husband, and I have run a boarding house 12 years on a deed in my own name. I am not going to step off my own deed into your kitchen and pretend the step was upward. All right. The second is that I will keep the ledgers in this house from now on, and you will read them with me on the first Sunday of every month, with the door closed and the coffee on, the two of us at this table, and you will not nod and look away. If a number is wrong, you will say so. If you do not understand a column, you will ask. I am not going to be the only person in this house who reads what is on the paper. All right, the third, yes. The third is the one that matters most. Mr. Calder, you looked at me across the supper table the night Cal made the joke about the chair, and you held the look. That was the first time anyone had looked at me like that in 8 years. I do not need you to look at me like that every day. I do need you to look at me, not past me, not at the doorway behind me, at me. You shut your eyes for 4 years. I am asking you to open them now and to keep them open. I will not be furniture in this house. I will not be the woman at the stove you walk past on your way to the barn. I have been called many things on a porch in front of strangers. And I have been called fat, and I have been called above my station, and I have been called a great many other words I will not say at this step, and I have held still through all of them. I will not hold still through being unseen by the man I have married. That is the third condition. Do you understand it? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I understand it. Do you agree to it? Yes. All of it. All of it. Whitmore. Martha. Martha. He turned his hat once more in his hands, and then he set it down on the step on his other side, and he reached across the hand's width of pine between them, and he took her hand in his. His hand was rough and cold from the night air. Hers was warm from the coffee pot. He held her hand, and he did not say anything else, and after a while she lifted her other hand and laid it against his face, against the gaunt place at his jaw he had not shaved that morning, and he closed his eyes and leaned into it the smallest fraction, the way a man leans into a doorway he has finally stopped flinching at. They sat that way a long time on the kitchen step and coat. In the morning, she was at the long pine table at dawn, with the green tin box open beside her. and a fresh leather book she had bought in town on Tuesday open in front of her, and she was writing the new season's provisioning in her own hand. Flour, $2.60 the hundredweight, the honest market price, ordered from Tully, who would deliver it at the honest market price for the next 12 months, by order of the territorial circuit. Beans at 4, bacon side at 12. Coffee at 24. Sugar at 9. She wrote them in her round, steady hand, down the left column the way Sarah had written them in her small, careful hand 4 years before. And at the top of the page she wrote the month and the year, and she wrote, beneath the year, in the same hand, Whitmore Calder, Bitter Creek. Wyatt came into the kitchen behind her, in his stocking feet with his hat already in his hand, and his coat over his arm, because the morning had a bite in it. He stopped at the doorway. He did not flinch. He stood there a moment, looking at her at the table, with the lamp at her elbow, and the new book open under her hand. And then he came in, and sat down across from her, and he poured himself coffee from the pot she had moved a half-inch to the left, and he watched her write. 3 days later word came up the basin that Silas Vane had been turned out of the rooms he kept above the bank in Bitter Creek, and that no boarding house in town would take him, and that he had been seen riding north on the same tall sorrel with a saddle roll, and no destination anyone could name, and that the federal marshal was a day behind him. The talk in town was that he would not winter anywhere in the territory because no one would have him. The talk at the Carleton place was that he had a sister in Missouri who might. The talk on the porch of the Mercantile was that he would freeze in a ditch and good riddance. Martha heard the talk on Sunday when Eleanor came for coffee. She listened to all of it. She poured Eleanor a second cup. She did not say anything for a long while. Then she went out to the smokehouse, and she cut down a side of bacon. And she went to the pantry, and she took down a sack of flour from the new delivery, 25 pounds. And she set them both on the porch. And she found Cal at the corral, and she said, Cal, I have a small errand. Ma'am, I would like you to ride into town this afternoon, and find out from Mrs. Beckett at the post office where Mr. Cond Vane is supposed to be tonight, and I would like you to ride to wherever that is, and leave this sack of flour and this side of bacon at the door, and I would like you not to leave a note, and I would like you not to be seen. Cal looked at her. He did not ask why. He took off his hat. Mrs. Whitmore. Yes. You are a better woman than I will ever understand. No, Cal, I am a woman who has been hungry once in her life and would not wish it on a dog. He rode. She went back into the kitchen. Eleanor was still at the table. Eleanor did not say anything about the errand. She had heard it through the open window, and she had drawn her own conclusions, and she was sitting with both hands around her cup, and after a while she said, Sarah would have done that. Yes, Martha said. I expect she would. She sat down at the table across from Eleanor. The lamp was unlit because the morning was bright. The new book was open at her elbow. Outside, in the yard, Wyatt was teaching one of the younger hands how to set a corner post the right way, the way he had not bothered to teach anyone in 4 years, and his voice was carrying through the open door, plain and steady and present. Martha looked at the door. She looked at the table. She looked at her own hands flat on the wood on either side of the new book, in her own hand. She had stepped off the stage at the Mercantile 20 days ago, with a single trunk, and a man on the porch had bet a chair against her before sundown, and she had not flinched, and she had not spoken, and she had walked the 4 miles out to a ranch. And she had opened a kitchen no one had opened in 4 years, and she had read a book no one had read in 4, and she had set a table that had drawn 43 neighbors out of the basin to sit at it, and she had set her conditions plainly at a step in the dark, and a man who had not looked at her at first had agreed to every one. She had not become smaller for any of it. She had not become quieter. She had not become prettier. She had taken up exactly the room she took up, which was a great deal of room, and she had filled it with work, and the work had been seen. She had never been invisible. She had only been unseen, and only by men who would not look. And the man at the corner post in the yard was looking now, and would look from now on, because he had said so. At midnight on a kitchen step, and a woman who had run a boarding house for 12 years, knew the difference between a promise a man made because he was tired, and a promise a man made because he meant it for the rest of his days. She closed the new book. She set her hand flat on the cover. She had earned every acre of it.